In this video, we're really talking about emotional blindness. So what I mean by that is, if I have alexithymia, I'm not really sure how I feel, and I have a problem putting my feelings into some type of a vocabulary. I also have trouble reading other people's emotions or understanding what they're referring to when they're actually talking about their emotions. So since I'm kind of in the dark with respect to emotions, both in myself and others, I prefer talking to people about their daily activities and about facts and tasks rather than feelings. So if I have alexithymia, I have difficulty communicating or describing emotions to others, so it's difficult for me to find the right words for my feelings. And since it's awkward conversation for me, the feelings conversation, I tend to want to shy away from those conversations. It's especially problematic for me in the case where I have a neurotypical spouse and she wants to talk to me about how she feels, and it's a double whammy for me, so to speak, when she wants to talk to me about how she feels with respect to the problems we're having in the relationship. So now I'm really in a conversation that I don't want to have. Also, when I'm in a conversation with my spouse about feelings and about problems in the relationship, I have feelings that I can't quite identify. So honestly, I can't even have an emotionally intelligent conversation with my neurotypical wife because she's really speaking French and I simply don't know how to speak French. In fact, alexithymia literally means no words for feelings. So if I have the inability to understand the intricacies of feelings and emotions, and I have difficulty trying to name, understand, and talk about feelings, I'm either going to avoid conversations where I'm required to talk about how somebody else feels and how I feel, or if I do try to have that conversation, I'm probably going to do it very poorly, which I then run the risk of coming off to the other individual as insensitive, uncaring, selfish, lacking empathy and sympathy, and maybe even come off as being somewhat narcissistic. So alexithymia is not just a lack of interest in emotional connection. It's a lack of desire to engage in emotional connection because I struggle with it so much. And that's frustrating to me. But unfortunately, it's also frustrating to the person that wants to connect with me at an emotional level, and I simply can't or don't. Some of the symptoms of alexithymia would be a narrow capacity to understand the reasons behind certain emotions, heightened sensitivity to physical touch, which causes a real problem in the area of intimacy with my significant other, struggling to identify emotions expressed by others, difficulty with naming different kinds of emotions, indifference towards other people, and in some cases saying or doing something that others perceive as highly inappropriate because I simply don't have the emotional intelligence to filter some of the things that I may say or do that may be hurtful to others. Another interesting and unfortunate manifestation of alexithymia is, since I'm not in tune with my emotions, that doesn't mean that the emotion isn't there. It just means that I can't identify it very well with the emotional part of my brain. So what ends up happening is I tend to get physical symptoms of the emotion that's not getting expressed properly. In other words, I have a particular feeling that I can't express in a functional way, and so my body ends up expressing that feeling in perhaps a dysfunctional way. For example, a person who is very angry yet doesn't know how to express their anger might develop a stomach ache or a headache or an ulcer. A person who is very anxious but can't identify that they're in a state of anxiety might develop high blood pressure. They may slip into rage, meltdowns, and even shutdowns. The treatment options for alexithymia are usually very different from typical counseling or talk therapy. The therapist who has an expertise in this area will most likely concentrate on building a foundation of naming emotions and appreciating a range of emotions. Or more broadly, the process will involve helping the individual grow their emotional intelligence.
There's a myth that the guys on the autism spectrum don't have empathy. They have all kinds of empathy. In fact, in too many cases that they were so empathic, as bizarre as this is going to sound, in many cases, more than you would ever believe, as children, they were so empathic, but the empathy raised their anxiety so much they had to choke it off. I call that the paramedic effect, where they were so empathic that it was simply unbearable to live that way. The reason I call it the paramedic effect is because you can't be an empath and a paramedic at the same time. Because as a paramedic, you're dealing with blood, death, dead babies, shootings. You have to train yourself to choke your emotions off at the neck. And some of these guys that are so-called have no empathy, they've done that at a very young age. They didn't even know they were doing it. They even did it at an unconscious level. They stopped feeling because it was too anxiety-provoking. So, but now we fast forward to today, they have empathy, they just don't display empathy. They're not very emotional, they don't talk about feelings. They have kind of a flat affect when you tell them what kind of a dirty, rotten day you've had, and it looks as if they don't give a shit. So first of all, it's not no empathy, it's low in displayed empathy, which is not an executive function deficit. It has to do with the mind, it has to do with the alexithymia business or the emotions blindness business. That sometimes once they think about it, and they've been able to put some pieces of the puzzle together, which they don't do in the snap of a finger like you're suggesting, then they realize maybe in retrospect, oh, I kind of understand where she's coming from now, and I probably should have offered a little moral support or some kind of compassion type thing. Cognitive empathy, for the guy with ASD level 1, he knows that he should be empathic. We'll have to make an example where he was supposed to have some compassion for his wife, and she felt like she didn't get it. So cognitively, he understands, well, I guess I should have stopped what I was doing and looked interested and said some supportive things. With alexithymia, there's a disconnect there because as much as they would want to, I've never met a guy that doesn't want to feel empathy. You know, if the ladies in here, if one of their close friends called them on the phone and said, oh, my dog just got ran over by a car and got killed, the friend, the NT lady friend that heard that message would feel viscerally sick. It would be like, ugh. She would feel that connection between terrible news and a body sensation. Or if her child ran out, I'm just making some simple examples off my head, ran out in the street when there was traffic out there, she would instantly feel panic, face hot, sweat, lump in her throat. She would instantly make the connection between danger and the physical, the associated physicalness of that, the visceral response. That's lost for people with full-blown alexithymia. So one of the things would be emotional self-awareness. Now, the NTs in here, when they are, I want to make up an example, when they are fearful of something, they have some anxiety about something, but they don't know what the source of the anxiety is. They go purely on the physical signals, get a lump in their throat, maybe they start to get sweaty, maybe they start to get, their blood pressure comes up, in their visceral area, they start to have this yucky feeling in their stomach. And they can tell that even though they couldn't put their finger on what's raising their anxiety, their body is telling them that something is not right. The guy with ASD, oftentimes he won't know that he's escalating on the anxiety scale until after he's blown up. And then he'll go, oh, I guess I was anxious. I didn't catch that way back when I was building up. So when my body gives me physical signals that something is wrong, do I pay attention to it and sense what's going on? Do I ignore it? Or do I not even pick up on it at all? That's going to be emotional awareness. Another piece would be empathy. That's not a new word for you coming from me. So you could ask yourself, do I really listen to people when they talk about their issues, or do I just try to jump to a solution? Or as they're talking to me, am I really lost over here in my fantasy world thinking about something else because their topic is boring? Do people confide in me, or do they know that if they come to me, they're not going to get much in the way of consideration, that type of thing? Another component to emotional intelligence, we'll call it, would be impulse control. So a question you could answer, ask yourself was, do I respond to people before they finish telling me something? Or am I quick to want to hurry up and get the conversation over with? Am I quick to want to interrupt the normal flow of give and take conversation and start talking about my special interests and so on? Another component to emotional intelligence would be interpersonal relationships. Do I enjoy socializing with people, or does it feel like work? Do I enjoy talking with my wife, or does talk feel like work? Do I enjoy having sex with my wife, or does sex feel like work? Perhaps the last component, not that there's just these, emotional intelligence, we could call it self-actualization. Am I doing the things in life that I'm really passionate about? Do I really enjoy interpersonal interactions at work, at home? Do I feel like I have a sense of purpose? So that would be another component to emotional intelligence. It's totally common for a child, this usually happens in childhood, where he is the opposite of a sociopath. He's an empath. And he learned at a very young age that it was too anxiety provoking to feel others' pain. And he learned, and this probably all happened at an unconscious level because he didn't know what he was doing, learned to shut his feelings off because it was too painful to feel other people's pain. And I refer to this as the paramedic effect. If you're a paramedic, you cannot be an empath because you're dealing with death, destruction, babies being mutilated in cars, stumbling on the scenes where there's mass murder and blood everywhere. The same thing happens with military individuals during time of war. You can't be an empath and be a good soldier. If you're concerned about hurting somebody in times of war, you're at a huge risk. You have to shut it off at the neck, your feelings. So it's not terribly uncommon for some of these guys on the autism spectrum who appear to lack empathy. It's not that they don't lack empathy, they don't display empathy, and at some level they've learned to shut their emotions off.
And I oftentimes get emails or comments on my blog post or Facebook pages from NT wives stating that they don't understand mind blindness. They say something along the lines of, I just don't understand why he can't see certain things. I tell him over and over how I feel, and he just never seems to get it. And I just don't understand this mind blindness thing. Well, it's hard for somebody who is mind sighted, to make up a term, to understand somebody who's mind blind. Now, you could easily imagine what it would be like to be blind. All you'd have to do is put some blinders on and walk around the house, try to get out in the driveway to get in your car, and try to make your way through the grocery, and you could easily duplicate that and know exactly what it's like to be blind. Or you could plug up your ears and you would know what it's like to be deaf, but you're never going to know, for example, I'm just going to make up a perhaps ridiculous example, what it would be like growing up as a child in a Nazi concentration camp. We can't duplicate that because we'd have to go back in time, we'd have to set up a concentration camp, we'd have to relocate to Germany, you'd have to regress from adulthood down to childhood, and so there's just too many there's no way to replicate that or do an experiment, so to speak, to give you some indication of what it might be like to be a 5-year-old little girl growing up in a Nazi concentration camp. You're never going to know what that feels like. So in the same way, since you're mind sighted, you're never going to know what it is to be mind blind. And so it would make sense to me why it doesn't make sense to you that he doesn't get it. So the best I can do to help you is set up a little experiment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 comments, and I want you to tell me which one is sarcastic and which one is authentic or honest. Okay, you ready? Thanks a lot, Dave. Okay, here's the second one. Thanks a lot, Dave. Okay, of those 2, which one was sarcastic and which one was genuine? You have no clue. The mind-blind individual, or the person with alexithymia, which we call them, they would be the alexithymic. Both of those statements appeared the same. But here's what they looked like for the mind-sighted person. Here's the first one. Thanks a lot, Dave. Here's the second one. Thanks a lot, Dave. Now you can clearly see the first one was honest, the second one was sarcastic. The mind-blind individual can't tell the difference between the two. And so when you are, for example, sarcastic with your mind-blind spouse and expect him to get that it's sarcasm, he's not going to get it. Or if you say, well, I feel this way about that, and you expect him to take how you feel and apply it to some course of action he's supposed to take, he's not going to get that. So with this business of being out of touch with what other people might be thinking or what they might be feeling, we have to be very concrete instead of vague. We have to make our message very short so we don't end up with data dumping, and now he has data overload, and there's too many factors involved to dissect each one and figure out what he's supposed to get. I hope that makes sense, guys. Thank you.
Hey, this is Mark Hutten. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendar link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.